Hello, my name is Daphne, and this is not just a story. It's a warning. At my sister's engagement party, they raised their glasses while quietly planning to take my home. They called it helping her start fresh. I called it what it was, betrayal dressed in celebration. They said, "Just sign here." They smiled, hugged me, and stole everything I had built. But the real shock, it wasn't the forgery, it wasn't even the silence. It was realizing my own mother led it all. So I fought, quietly, legally, precisely. Now, I want to ask you, what would you do if your family turned your love into leverage? I never received an invitation, not a card in the mail, not an email, not even a text. Nothing. The first time I learned about Indira's engagement party was when a cousin casually posted a photo on Facebook. I stared at that image for a long, aching moment. Glittering lights hung like constellations from the ceiling. Elegant dresses shimmered under chandeliers. A massive banner stretched across the backdrop. "Congratulations, Indira Brandon." And me? I wasn't anywhere. Not in the photo, not on the guest list, not even mentioned. I texted my sister. "Hey, when is your engagement?" Her reply arrived almost instantly. "Oh, I thought Leora already told you. Just swing by." Swing by. She wrote it as if I were a latecomer to a movie for which everyone else had been handed VIP tickets. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. I swallowed the sting, said nothing. As always, I said nothing. I'm Daphne, 45 years old, a legal archivist in Austin, Texas. My life is modest, organized files, stamped dates, and neat rows of boxes. After my divorce, I bought a small 2-bedroom house, my one concrete achievement, the single place I could call completely mine. My sister Indira, 48, has always been the golden child, successful, polished, everything our parents envisioned. She excelled in school, collected awards like seashells, traveled the world. To them, she was the shining one. And then there's Leora, my closest friend since college. A pharmacist with a warm smile and an honesty that never wavers. She got the invitation early. Her name was printed clearly on the official guest list. Mine never appeared. Still, I drove to the event that evening, my heart pounding against the steering wheel. The sun dipped low behind the Texas live oaks, shadows pooling like ink along the sidewalks. I parked a block away and walked toward the entrance, the sound of laughter and music spilling out to greet me before I even saw the building. The venue had been transformed into something out of a magazine. White drapery billowed against soft lighting. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A red carpet ran up to the doors. Everything about it screamed elegance, grandeur, exclusivity. As I approached, my mother waved faintly at me, her eyes scanning past me before returning to Indira, as though I were a flicker in her peripheral vision. My father didn't lift his eyes from his drink. I passed through the foyer, my footsteps absorbed by the plush carpet. The rumble of conversation surrounded me, clusters of people greeting, hugging, laughing. I paused at the guest list stand, expecting to see my name somewhere between the cousins and old family friends. It wasn't there. Names lined up in neat columns, every branch of the family tree represented. Cousins, aunts, uncles, even distant acquaintances, but not mine. A catering staff member walked by, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. He glanced at me, then at the guest list. "Looking for your seat?" he asked politely. I nodded. He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the main hall, then lowered his voice. "That's the overflow, behind the kitchen area." He pointed discreetly toward a long, narrow table pushed up against a folding door labeled Service Entrance. I followed his gaze. No name card, no wine glass, just a napkin folded haphazardly and a single glass of lukewarm water waiting at the far end. I walked slowly toward the spot, the sound of laughter growing louder with each step. The contrast struck hard. Other tables arranged in perfect circles, glowing centerpieces of roses and candles casting warm light. Mine, dim and forgotten, tucked beside trays and crates. Deep loneliness settled into my chest like a stone. I wanted to vanish, or maybe yell, but instead I sat quietly, always quietly. At the head table I could hear them. "She's lucky she even owns a home," a voice murmured softly, almost as if daring me to hear. Maybe she'll help with the reception costs. Another whispered, low but sharp. Their smiles were bright for the cameras. Their words, cold and precise blades. I sipped my water, my fingers steady only by force of will. I pressed down the impulse to stand up and leave. If I walked out now, I would be the bitter sister, the jealous one, the cautionary tale they'd spin later. I refused to give them that story. My eyes drifted back to Indira, radiant at the center of it all, radiant in a way that made me feel invisible. My mother laughed at something Indira said, as though I weren't sitting just a few feet away. My father stayed solemn, avoiding my gaze entirely. Still, I sat. My mind wandered, unbidden, to graduation. Indira had received a new car. I had gotten a half-hearted, good job card from Dad, and the expectation to find a part-time job, because I had no future in big things. I had worked 3 jobs to save enough to buy my house. No help, no family loans, no congratulations. Always me, expected to do more. A hush fell across the hall as the MC stepped to the front. Glasses clinked softly as guests turned their attention. To Indira and her future, he announced grandly, his voice echoing off the walls. May we all support her dreams. Heads bowed slightly. The room quieted. And then, as if on cue, eyes turned toward me. My heart froze. My mother cleared her throat softly. Her voice came gentle, too gentle, the way someone speaks when they're about to cut deep. Daphne, she said, maybe this is the time you finally help your sister. Sell that house? The words lodged in my throat like stones. I raised my glass slowly, nodded once, and forced a small smile. Inside, something cracked. I held the glass steady, my fingers trembling only on the inside, and wondered if they could hear it, the sound of that fracture, that silent break in the girl who had always yielded. I just smiled that night, swallowed my pride, and raised my glass. Outwardly, I looked composed, maybe even complicit, but inside, something cracked. The next morning, I woke tangled in my sheets, clothes still clinging to my body, mascara smeared in faint smudges across my skin, where I must have rubbed my eyes in restless half-sleep. The night came back to me only in fragments, bursts of laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft whisper of my mother's voice cutting into me like a knife. Help your sister. Sell that house. The words echoed still, abrasive as sandpaper against my ribs. I sat in the quiet dimness of my bedroom for a long while, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the only sound in a house that felt at once too silent and too alive. My own ragged breathing filled the gaps. I pressed my palms against the mattress as though bracing myself against invisible weight. Finally, I stood. My body was stiff, every step deliberate, as if I were walking through wet cement. In the living room, dawn light filtered through the blinds, casting the space in a cool, bluish hue. My eyes landed on every familiar detail. The coffee table I had picked out secondhand but refinished myself, the worn couch with its cushion forever dented in one corner, the little framed photograph of me at 30, smiling a little too wide, but proud in that moment of independence. This house, modest, imperfect, but steady, was more than real estate. It was refuge. It was mine. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, sipping slowly. Outside, the oak tree swayed lightly in the morning breeze. I remembered planting it the first spring I moved in, a sapling so small I could carry it in one arm. Now its branches stretched confidently, its roots deep in my soil. To anyone else, it was just a tree. To me, it was proof. Proof that I had built something. Proof that growth could happen on stubborn ground. Later that morning, my mind wouldn't stop replaying the speech from the party. Not the compliments, not the toasts, but the lines that stung like nettles. Some of us made sacrifices, someone had said, eyes flicking toward me. Others were handed a house and stayed silent. The applause that followed had felt orchestrated, hollow. And me? I had sat there, mute, the tolerated extra in a celebration that didn't need me. I thought of my childhood in East Texas, the day Indira got a shiny new car for her high school graduation, a reward for excellence, a symbol of promise. And me? I got a card scrawled with "Good job" from Dad and the unspoken expectation to pick up shifts at the grocery store because community college won't pay for itself. I remembered poring over law books late at night, working shifts by day, saving pennies and dollars until I could buy this house. Alone, no family loans, no one clapping when I signed the deed. Always me, expected to sacrifice more. At midday, my phone rang. Mother. My chest tightened as soon as her name appeared. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me said, "Answer." "Hi, Mom." My voice came out calm, flat, drained of the emotion roiling beneath. "Good morning, sweetie," she said, her tone sugar-dusted but heavy beneath. "I was just thinking, Indira's celebration has been so beautiful. You know, you don't even utilize all your space. Perhaps you might consider helping with the reception costs. It would mean so much to us." Polite words, but every syllable was a command. I closed my eyes. "Mom, this house belongs to me," I said, soft but firm. She sighed, a slow, theatrical sound that meant you're being difficult. "Oh, honey, this is your chance to show family, your loyalty." Loyalty. That word again, used like a chain. I hung up before she could say more. My heart pounded, not with shame, but with fury. They always framed my survival as devotion owed. That afternoon, I went into my office. I tried to lose myself in work, burying my mind in archival files, deeds, contracts, property transfers. My hands moved through the motions, but my thoughts kept circling back home. Back to the deed tucked away in my safe drawer, marked "Paid in Full." That paper was more than proof of ownership. It was my anchor. I had safeguarded it for a moment exactly like this, a moment when family ties turned into shackles. If they tried to claim what wasn't theirs, I would hold that deed like a sword. That evening, I sat at my dining table, simple oak, sturdy legs. I spread the deed before me, smoothing the edges with my fingertips. Mine. No one else's. It carried my name, my sweat, my history. It hit me then. They weren't just asking me to sell a house. They were asking me to hand over my identity, to erase the only monument I had built with my own hands without their scaffolding. My phone buzzed. A text from Indira. "Thanks in advance. Can't wait to hear from the realtor." My hand trembled. She spoke as if the matter was settled, as if she had the authority to make decisions about my life, my property, my story. Her words weren't a request, they were a declaration. That was the moment something shifted. I decided I would no longer wait to be pushed. I would act. I stood, slipped the deed back into its protective sleeve, and tucked it under my arm. Then I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. The sky had deepened to twilight, the air carrying that quiet hush of Austin's streets between rush hours. My headlights cut through the dim as I drove, not aimlessly, but with direction. I pulled up in front of the title company office. I didn't go in. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to observe. I sat in the car, noting the address, the layout, the glass front doors, the way the evening light reflected off the windows. I made a map in my head, cataloging what I would need to know if this fight turned into paperwork and legal fire. Then I drove home. The night had fully settled now, the city's hum softened. Back in my bedroom, I stood before the mirror. I pulled a small index card from the desk, wrote 3 words in block letters, and taped it to the glass. "Not for sale." I stared at it for a long time. The words looked small against the expanse of reflection, but they carried weight. They weren't just a reminder, they were a vow. I turned off the light, stretched out on my bed, and stared at the ceiling. Through the window, the faintest star blinked in the distance, stubborn against the darkness. Inside me, something kindled, not just resistance, fire. They would come for the house, yes. They would circle, whisper, scheme, but they would never come for my resolve. That was when the memories began to pour in, unbidden and sharp. Every moment I had been expected to sacrifice, every instance where my effort was taken for granted, every time they walked away without so much as a thank you. I woke early the next morning. The house was quiet, still heavy with the residue of the night before. Sunlight crept through the linen blinds in my bedroom, cutting the wall with a thin, angled line of pale gold. I lay there for a moment, eyes half open, heart thudding with a strange, quiet urgency. The ache under my ribs was not physical. It was the ache of being erased, of knowing that you were present in flesh but absent in memory. I sat up, pressing my palms against my eyes, as though I could press the sting of it all back into darkness. It didn't work. The ache was awake with me. When I reached for my phone, the screen lit with a new message from my cousin. The words were casual, cheerful, oblivious. Just finished uploading the slideshow from last night. I hesitated before tapping the link. The video opened. A stream of images spilled across the screen. Smiling faces, swirling dresses, champagne glasses catching the light. Indira was everywhere. Radiant in sequined gowns, her fiancé Brandon at her side, bridesmaids fussing over bouquets, relatives laughing as though they had stepped into a dream. Then came the family photos, decades of birthdays, holidays, vacations, carefully curated moments meant to stitch together a legacy. I searched for myself. There I was, once in the blurry background of a crowd, face barely visible. Another time, half cut from the frame, as though I didn't belong in the shot. And that was all. 2 traces, 2 faint proofs that I existed. My throat tightened. They hadn't merely forgotten me, they had erased me. Their version of history didn't want me in it. I paused the playback, my reflection faint in the darkened screen. The narrative loop was clear. Her achievements, their celebrations, their milestones. Indira twirling in childhood dresses, the white folds of fabric catching sunlight, laughter echoing from years past. My lips tingled with all the words I had swallowed. This wasn't oversight. This was design. I heard movement behind me and turned. Leora stood at the threshold of my bedroom, holding 2 coffee mugs. Her eyes softened when they met mine, full of sorrow and apology. "I'm so sorry, Daphne," she said quietly. Her voice had the kind of weight that made silence tremble. She stepped forward, offering me one of the mugs. The steam curled between us. "I saw it too," she continued. "This was supposed to be her night, but the way they framed it, our silence made it yours too." Her words hung between us like smoke. I took the mug and sipped, the heat grounding me. Together we sat for a few minutes, listening to the muted hum of the city pressing faintly against the walls, the sound of morning traffic building in the distance. Later, I sat on the porch, the wood still cool under my feet, the morning air crisp against my skin. I tilted my head back, eyes following the slow arc of a bird overhead. Memories rose again, harsh and uninvited. I thought back to my 8th birthday. Indira had been taken to Disneyland. I had stayed home with a boxed cake and a babysitter. That evening, my parents called me with pictures of her smiling in front of Sleeping Beauty's castle, fireworks lighting the sky behind her. I had told myself back then that maybe they couldn't afford to bring both of us. But now, decades later, the truth glared plain. It was never about money. It was about value, and I was not the one in the picture. Leora nudged me gently, pulling me back from the spiral. Her voice was quiet but firm. "You weren't forgotten by me." Her words were small, but hope, even whispered, can feel heavy when you've been starved of it. After she left, I walked back inside and checked the mailbox, clinging to a shred of doubt that maybe, just maybe, there had been a mistake. But there was nothing. No invitation. No embossed card. Just a stack of bills and a glossy catalog. Everyone else had received their elegant printed cards, names in raised ink, monograms stamped in gold foil, RSVP notes pressed into thick paper. I had been given a generic group text. No weight, no formality, no acknowledgement that my presence was worth the ink it took to print. Why send me a text if they had already assumed I would show up anyway? It wasn't an oversight, it was a message. You don't matter. That afternoon, my resolve wavered, but only slightly. I typed a text to Indira. "Did I get a printed invite? I didn't see one." Her reply came quickly. "We thought you wouldn't want the fuss." Fuss. That word sliced. As if I were an inconvenience. As if my inclusion were a burden, not a belonging. I stared at the screen, then deleted the thread. I would not plead for a seat at a table that never wanted me there. That night, under the soft glow of my desk lamp, I opened a drawer and pulled out a dusty flash drive. I sat in silence, the hum of the lamp buzzing faintly in the corner of my hearing, and began to work. One by one, I saved every email, every text, every voicemail. I collected every piece of evidence that traced the years of neglect and erasure, party plans that referenced me only in passing, drafts of invitations that cut me out, messages where my name appeared as an afterthought. Each file I copied felt like a small stone added to an arsenal I didn't yet know how to use. I wasn't sure what I was building, not yet, but for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be erased. I was preparing. The first clue came faster than I expected, delivered not in person, not in writing, but through a slip of technology. It was late afternoon when it happened. I had just returned from the most ordinary errands, groceries crinkling in paper bags, the muted scent of detergent from the dry cleaner's plastic wrapping, the small orange bottles from the pharmacy rattling faintly in my purse. The sky was shifting, the sun dipping low over the neighborhood rooftops, stretching shadows long across my living room floor, as if even daylight wanted to lengthen the moment before it snapped. I set my keys on the entryway table. Before I could shrug out of my jacket, my phone buzzed in my hand. One new voicemail notification from a number I didn't recognize. I frowned. Strangers rarely left me messages. My thumb hovered over the play icon, suspicion pricking at the back of my neck. The recording began with a man's voice, casual but clipped. "Yes, when we stage it, let her think she's still relevant. Don't ruin her hope too soon. We'll slide in the documents, make it look consensual." My breath stilled. Then, unmistakable, my mother's voice followed. "She'll never question. Just act like her signature was lost. Let her think she has control until it's over." My pulse thundered so violently, I thought I might faint right there on the carpet. I sank to my knees, phone pressed tight against my ear, my body folded like I was trying to shield myself from a blow. I replayed the message again, and then again. The words were calculated, rehearsed. They weren't talking about an accident or a misunderstanding. They were strategizing, plotting to make me believe I had choices while stripping them away one by one. It was manipulation, pure and cold. A theater of control in which my role had been written for me. The quiet, naive sister who would nod when told, sign where directed, and let them carry her life away like another piece of family silver. I closed my eyes and let the surge of emotion crash through me. Rage, grief, disbelief. But I did not cry. Not this time. When I opened my eyes, I acted. I saved the voicemail, tagged it with the date and time, and backed it up to my secure folder, one I'd created precisely for moments like this. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront. Some reactions burn too quickly, and I had learned the only defense is patience. Later that evening, the doorbell rang. My body tensed. I opened the door to find a small brown package with no return address. Inside was a leatherette planner, elegant and feminine. The embossed cover read, "Smart Women Budget Better." It looked harmless enough. Rows of neat columns inside for tracking expenses, savings, mortgage payments. But when I flipped through the pages, my stomach dropped. The entries had already been filled in. Mortgage, listed as paid off through sale. Utilities, transferred. Remodeling, in process. The assumption was complete. According to this planner, my house, my only true refuge, was already sold. My life had been mapped out without my consent. A note slipped from between the pages. Written in my mother's precise, looping script, it read, "We just want to help you streamline. Love always." I held the planner at arm's length like it was something toxic. Under the glossy guise of kindness was a demand, surrender. I set it down on the floor by the door, as if it might detonate, and walked away. At dusk, I moved through the kitchen in silence, brewing tea to steady my shaking hands. I didn't shred the planner. I didn't throw it away. Its presence alone was a threat, and I wanted to remember how threats looked when they were dressed as gifts. My phone lay on the counter, screen glowing faintly. I picked it up, dialed the number of a local lawyer I had researched weeks ago but never called. My voice was steady. "I have a property question," I said evenly. Could I schedule a consultation? The woman on the other end agreed, her tone brisk, professional. That night, I sat at my desk under the warm pool of lamplight and began to layer my evidence: the planner, the voicemail, texts and emails, archived one by one, from Indira, from my mother, from distant relatives who parroted their words. I created folders, labeled meticulously, arranged in timelines. I wasn't simply reacting, I was preparing. When I paused to look at myself in the mirror, I didn't see the quiet, yielding figure they had painted me to be. I saw someone sharpening edges, someone waking up. The next evening brought dinner at my mother's house. Nothing formal, just a casual meal, they'd said. Roast chicken, red wine, laughter that didn't quite reach the walls. I walked in with purpose. Their surprise was visible. My mother bustled, apron tied, smile stretched too wide. Indira leaned close to compliment the food. My father told a joke, waiting for polite laughter. I sat, silent, waiting. Mom poured me wine. Her smile was syrup sweet. "I'm glad you came, Daphne," she said softly, as though rehearsed. I cleared my throat, my eyes sweeping the table. My voice came calm but steady, every syllable deliberate. "Funny," I said, "how people assume I'll always stay quiet." Her spoon froze halfway to her lips. Indira glanced at me, confusion flickering in her eyes, as though she hadn't yet realized what I knew. "What do you mean?" my mother asked, her voice soft, brittle around the edges. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze cutting across the table to my sister. "People talk about me like I'm absent, like I don't deserve to speak. But I hear, I see." I remember. The room went still. Forks lowered. Jokes died unspoken. My words lingered in the air, heavier than the smell of garlic and roast chicken. My mother's fork slipped, clattering against her plate. Indira's face paled. I smiled faintly, steady, almost gentle. "You'll see." No one spoke after that. No one dared. But their glances, sharp, uncertain, shaken, told me everything I needed. The balance had shifted. For the first time, I was not the ghost at the table. I knew something would happen that night. Something inevitable. Something I had sensed building for years. But I didn't expect it to come out in a single drunken sentence, raw and unfiltered, the kind of truth people usually keep locked away in the dark. I arrived at my mother's house just after dusk. The spring evening carried a hint of coolness, but the air inside was warm, thick with the scent of roasted chicken, garlic, and rosemary. The front door was ajar, spilling golden light onto the porch. I paused at the threshold, my stomach tightening when I caught sight of the dining table. 5 places were set. My mother, my father, Indira, her fiancé Brandon, and then one extra setting, hastily arranged. A napkin slightly off-center, a mismatched wine glass. My name had been penciled in at the last moment, as though someone had remembered, "Oh, right, Daphne exists." Mom greeted me first, sweeping me into a hug that smelled of wine and faint perfume. Her lips brushed my cheek with the kind of affection that felt rehearsed. "I'm glad you came," she murmured, and though the words were soft, her tone carried an edge that reminded me this wasn't really an invitation. It was an obligation. Indira was radiant as always, her smile polished, her hair perfect. She looked like someone born to be admired. My father gave me a curt nod from his end of the table. No warmth, no welcome, just acknowledgement, like a clerk noting my presence on a form. We settled into our seats. The overhead chandelier glowed a dim amber, casting flickering shadows across polished silverware. I sat opposite my mother, directly between her and Indira. The arrangement wasn't random. It never was. They liked me placed where they could both see and measure me. Mom poured the wine too quickly, filling glasses to the brim as though she were trying to chase something down or drown it entirely. Indira lifted her glass delicately, and my father cleared his throat for a toast. "To family," he said, raising his glass. "To unity, and to new beginnings." Everyone murmured, "To family," in return. The crystal clinked softly, a hollow music that didn't match the knot in my chest. My mother's eyes flicked toward me. She hesitated for the briefest second, swallowed hard, and then she said it. "She's the only one who ever made us proud." The words were quiet, barely louder than a breath, but in the silence that followed, they roared. Time seemed to slow. My fork hovered over my plate. Indira's knife slipped and clattered against porcelain. My father looked down into his wine as though it held the answers he couldn't face. And me? I sat frozen, heat flooding my body, my chest hollowed out. Those words weren't new. I'd heard them in different forms all my life, whispered in comparisons, tucked between sighs. But never had they been spoken so plainly, at the dinner table, in front of me, as if my very presence didn't matter enough to conceal the favoritism. I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to shout, to cry, to demand they see me. Instead, I forced my voice calm. "Mom," I said, steady and deliberate. "I've spent years believing the things you told me behind closed doors, and tonight, you made it public." Her cheeks flushed crimson. She averted her gaze, her wineglass trembling slightly in her hand. Indira lowered her eyes to her plate. My father said nothing, his silence as heavy as stone. Dinner limped forward. The chicken was carved, potatoes passed, but the taste had left my mouth. Then came another blow, this one dressed as generosity. Indira unwrapped a small velvet box and held it up with a bright smile. Inside gleamed a delicate silver necklace, handcrafted with a small teardrop pendant. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized it instantly. I had made that necklace months ago, carefully threading each bead by hand. I had planned to give it to my mother, a quiet offering of peace, a symbol that maybe bridges could still be rebuilt. But now, Indira held it high, announcing, "This is from our brother, a family gift to you, Mom." Laughter and applause fluttered around the table. My mother's eyes misted with staged gratitude. Heat rose in my cheeks, searing. I clenched my fists under the table before forcing myself to speak. My voice didn't shake. "That's interesting," I said evenly, "because I was the one who made it, for her." The table fell into stunned silence. Indira's smile faltered, her expression flickering between shock and feigned forgetfulness. "Oh, right," she stammered, pretending as though the truth had slipped her mind. I looked at each of them, letting the silence work for me. There she sits, the favored daughter, and here I am, the afterthought. The weight of my words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. I drew in a deep breath. My voice dropped lower, firmer. "Next time you erase me, just make sure I'm not even in the room." Mom's face tightened, her jaw clenched. Indira shifted uncomfortably in her chair. My father stayed blank, unreadable, unwilling to take sides. I pushed once more. "And if you keep pushing me, I'm done walking away." "I will respond." The statement landed like thunder in a quiet storm. No one argued. No one soothed. They simply stared, caught off guard by the steel in my tone. For years, they had trained me to keep quiet, to stay in my corner, to sacrifice. But not tonight. I stood. My chair scraped back across the floor, sharp and final. I nodded briefly to my father, turned toward the door, and left. No hugs, no smiles, no goodbyes. The cool night air wrapped around me as I stepped outside, steadier than I had been in years. The next morning, sunlight streamed through my blinds. My head still buzzed with the echo of last night. I walked to the mailbox, bare feet padding against the driveway. Inside, beneath junk flyers and bills, sat a thick legal envelope, my name typed cleanly on the front. I tore it open and froze. Inside were documents, property forms, signed with a signature that was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. The strokes were shaky, uneven, an imitation. My house. My name. My life. Suddenly fragile in someone else's hands. My name had been stolen, hijacked, used without my consent, and now, on paper at least, my house wasn't mine anymore. That envelope lay on the kitchen counter until late morning, long after I had woken and brewed coffee I never finished. The mug cooled beside it, untouched, as I stared at the thick, cream-colored paper stock that bore the return address of a downtown law firm. The name of the firm was familiar. It was the same one my father had relied on for years for business deals and trust management. Seeing their insignia pressed in ink on the corner made my stomach turn. The flap was sealed tightly, as though daring me to open it. The edges were crisp, the corners sharp, and yet its weight pressed against me like a stone on my chest. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. Still, I slid a finger under the flap, tore it cleanly, and drew out the papers. The words struck like cold iron. I, Daphne, last name, hereby authorize the sale of my property located at 1427 Westwood Lane. There it was, my name typed in neat serif font, followed by a looping signature at the bottom. My supposed signature, underlined, bold, and witnessed by a notary's stamp. Except I had never signed it. My breath grew shallow. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from a righteous anger so sharp it steadied me. I pressed my palm flat against the cool wood of the kitchen table, grounding myself. I could almost hear their self-congratulatory whispers, their smug satisfaction. They thought this would end me. They thought my silence meant I would accept whatever scraps they threw at me. They had underestimated the danger of someone who had been ignored too long. I grabbed my phone and dialed the county property records office. My pulse roared in my ears, but when the clerk answered, my voice came out level, controlled. Hi, this is Daphne, last name. I need to confirm the status of my property at 1427 Westwood Lane. There was a pause, the sound of typing on a keyboard. Then the clerk's voice, steady, clinical. Yes, Ms. Daphne. The property under your name was transferred last week. The sale is pending final deposit. I gripped the phone tighter. Transferred? To whom? More keystrokes, then, to an entity named Indira Development Trust. That's the receiving title. My blood went cold. And the proceeds, where are they allocated? The clerk cleared their throat, uncomfortable. The escrow account is under that trust, not your personal account. I felt the world tilt slightly. My knees went weak, but I stood tall, forcing air into my lungs. They had done it. They had forged my name, rerouted my future, stolen my security, and handed it neatly into Indira's hands. My skin crawled with the violation. I ended the call without another word. My fingers flew to the next number on my list, my lawyer. When he picked up, I didn't waste time with preamble. My voice was steel. They've moved the house. Everything's gone. He promised he would file motions, but I couldn't sit idle. That afternoon, I turned my kitchen table into a war desk. I requested a stop transfer motion, demanded copies of the notary's logbook, and formally petitioned for CCTV footage from the notary's office. Security cameras don't lie, I reminded myself. Even liars leave a trail. As I waited for email confirmations to roll in, I made copies of everything I already had. The forged consent form, mortgage statements, deed history. The voicemail I had saved weeks earlier, where my mother's voice betrayed the conspiracy. I organized it into folders, backed up the digital files onto an encrypted drive I labeled for court use only. Each click of the mouse felt like fastening a piece of armor around myself. By nightfall, my house was silent, the lamp at my desk casting a small circle of light over papers stacked in neat piles. I paced the living room, the creak of floorboards echoing against the weight of my thoughts. They expected me to crumble, to dissolve into tears and beg for scraps of mercy. But tears wouldn't come. Instead, something colder had settled inside me, clarity. When morning came, I was already awake, watching sunlight spill across the blinds in pale stripes. My phone rang before sunrise. The name flashing across the screen made my lip curl. Indira. I answered, voice calm. Why are we getting notices from the county clerk? She demanded. Her tone was thin, pretending to be surprised, but I could hear the cracks beneath it. I let a faint smile creep across my lips. Because you shouldn't forge signatures, I said quietly, firmly. And this is just the beginning. There was silence on the line. Silence that stretched long enough to confirm everything I already knew. I didn't wait for her reply. I ended the call myself. For years, they had counted on my silence, on my loyalty, on my willingness to carry the burdens and absorb the wounds without retaliation, But they had gone too far. They had crossed the line into theft and fraud, and now I had both evidence and resolve. They wanted a war in shadows. Fine. I had lived in shadows my entire life. It was about time I showed them I knew how to fight there too. The more I pushed back, the dirtier they played. And I wasn't ready for just how far they would go next. Morning broke with an almost ordinary calm. The hum of lawnmowers droned faintly from a few houses down. Sparrows chirped from the branches of the old oak near my porch, but inside there was no peace. I sat hunched at my kitchen table, fingers wrapped tight around a mug of black coffee, the kind so bitter it usually snapped me awake. Not today. My eyes were red, raw from a night of restless half-sleep, haunted by the forged envelope that still lay spread across the table like a taunt. I read the words again, even though I knew them by heart now. The consent form, my signature, the fraudulent transfer of my home into something called the Indira Development Trust, the notary stamp that lent it the illusion of legality. Each time I looked at it, the anger burned hotter. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure. They had gambled that silence meant surrender, that I'd fold in shame, too weary to fight. By mid-morning, the fallout began in subtle ways. At work, I noticed glances, furtive, assessing. A colleague I barely spoke to paused in the hallway, her tone hushed. "Hey, Daphne, you okay? HR wanted to see you." My stomach dropped. In the HR office, the words were smooth, polite, but sharp-edged. "We've just noticed some strain lately. We want to be sure you're supported." Their eyes flicked too quickly, their questions rehearsed. No mention of family, no mention of legal documents, just an implied concern, a wellness check. But I heard what they didn't say. Someone had been whispering, planting seeds, and those seeds were already sprouting in the places I could least afford. It got worse when I opened my inbox. The email subject line read, "Truth you owe us, anonymous." No sender name, no signature, just venom. My throat tightened as I clicked. Inside was a list of accusations, bullet points dressed as fact. Claims that I had forged my own property documents, that I had siphoned family funds, that I was lying under oath. Screenshots filled the body of the message, some real, some manipulated beyond recognition. My own handwriting cropped, twisted, pasted onto papers I had never seen. The words grew sharper as I read, "Deeply unwell, unstable, erratic behavior, a danger to family legacy." It felt like a punch to the gut. My hands went cold, my body stiff with rage. They weren't fighting me head-on. They were poisoning the air, tainting reputations in shadows. And the phrasing, I knew it too well. This was Indira's language. She had mastered the art of staying nice, keeping her smile polished, while stabbing from behind curtains. I couldn't sit there stewing. I grabbed my bag, left work early, and drove home beneath a gray sky that mirrored the storm brewing in my chest. I parked in the driveway and sat in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Then I pulled out my phone. A text to Leora. "Meet me in an hour at the cafe. Urgent." Then a call to my attorney. My voice was sharp. "We prepared defamation. Everything they've circulated. I want counterproof ready to go. Every forgery, every smear, every lie. We respond, line for line." He agreed without hesitation. That was all I needed to hear. At the cafe, Leora was waiting, her brow furrowed with concern. She slid a folder across the table before I even ordered coffee. Inside were screenshots she had collected, social media posts, carefully worded comments, whispers turned into digital ink. One post accused me of losing touch with reality. Another implied I had fabricated documents to enrich myself. All of them framed in the same way. Not wild enough to be dismissed outright, but poisonous enough to make people wonder. The timing was precise, like a chess move. Every rumor had appeared just after news of the forged property sale broke. I looked at Leora, fighting tears. My voice was low, steady. "They're trying to break me in public, so no one will believe me in court." Her eyes were fierce. "But you have something they don't," she said. "You have truth and evidence." That night, I made my move. I sat at my desk with the glow of a desk lamp illuminating the stacks of paper that had become my shield. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For once, I didn't craft an essay or a diatribe. I didn't rant. I didn't beg. I posted a single statement to my social media. Never mistake quiet for consent. I've been silent, not blind. Attached were two images, side by side, the forged property transfer form bearing my falsified signature, and a separate notarized document from months prior showing my real handwriting. The difference was glaring. The forgery looked manufactured, uneven, digital. My true signature carried the weight of years, natural strokes, irrefutable. I hit post. Then I closed the laptop and let the evidence speak for itself. By morning, the response had begun. Notifications flooded my phone, messages from neighbors, co-workers, distant acquaintances. Some were shocked. Some sent quiet notes of support. Others simply wrote, "We believe you." My throat ached as I read them. For once, the silence wasn't mine. It was theirs. Then the phone rang. Indira's name flashed on the screen. I answered, bracing myself. Her voice was sharp but trembling. "Why are we getting letters from the county clerk?" I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. "Because you shouldn't forge signatures," I replied evenly. "And this is just the beginning." The silence that followed was thick, weighted. I let it hang, then ended the call. By evening, the knock came, sharp, precise. I opened the door to find a woman in a navy blazer holding a plain envelope. Her tone was professional, detached. "Are you Daphne, last name?" "Yes." She handed me the envelope. "You've been served." I took it, feeling the paper's weight in my hands, heavier than it should have been. The process server gave me a brief nod, then left without ceremony. I stood in my doorway, tore the flap, and scanned the first line. Indira, last name, V. Daphne, last name. Filed under defamation. I laughed then, not loud, not mocking, but a quiet, incredulous sound. My lips curved into something sharper than a smile. "Good," I whispered to myself. "Now we're playing fair." Because for the first time she had stepped out of the shadows, and in the light, I knew exactly how to fight. If she wanted war in public, I was done fighting in private. I arrived at the courthouse well before sunrise, the chill in the air sharper than usual. From my car, I watched silhouettes of people crossing marble steps and heard distant voices echo in the lobby. I held my lawyer's folder close, my evidence, voice memos, documents, recordings, all that I'd been quietly gathering. This was the moment where silence would finally be answered in full voice. Inside, I stood before the courtroom doors, heart trembling but resolve fixed. My knees shook not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to unfold. I adjusted my jacket and inhaled deeply. Today was not merely about reclaiming property. It was about asserting that I am seen, that I existed. Indira entered first. Her face was drawn. She avoided my gaze. She walked past the judge's bench, head low. Mother never appeared. I searched the benches. Her absence stung like salt. Maybe she couldn't bear to look me in the eye. My attorney guided me to the stand. The judge's chambers were hushed, draped in wood and solemnity. My pulse was loud, but I stood tall, the courtroom filled. Family, media, strangers. The hush felt potent. When cross-examination began, the air crackled. "Ms. Indira," the attorney said, "please confirm whether this handwriting is yours." He slid a document across. Her hand hovered. She glanced nervously at her mother's empty seat. "It looks somewhat familiar," she said, her voice unsteady. Then the shocking blow. "Can you explain this voice memo retrieved from Ms. Daphne's secure storage?" He played the audio. "Just get the signature. She never checks anything." Gasps broke out. The judge leaned forward, eyes widened. Indira's face went pale, but the next revelation crushed any hope of concealment. I submitted a second recording, one I'd held back until now. On it, Mother's voice murmured, "She won't fight. She never has. Just file it. She'll fold." Tears welled, but I refused to let them fall. I stood there, exposed, yet more powerful than ever. because now everyone could hear. The judge's gavel pounded. "Forgery and fraud with intent to deceive," he pronounced. He ordered immediate restitution and penalty. The courtroom shattered into gasps. Indira broke into tears. She slumped in the chair, sobbing, throat raw. But my heart was heavier, not because she was falling, but because Mother never even showed. She forfeited her chance to defend her lies. Outside, reporters lined up, microphones thrust forward. I walked to the cameras, shoulders squared. "Do you have anything to say to your sister?" someone shouted. I paused, letting silence stretch. Then I looked into the lens. I forgave her a long time ago. I just stopped letting her win. The words carried beyond me. They hit home. That night, my phone buzzed with a voicemail I almost ignored. It was Mother. Her voice trembled. "Maybe you were never meant to be part of this family after all." My fingers hovered over the delete button, but I pressed play. But I had already found something better, peace, and that was mine alone to keep. Morning light filtered through linen curtains as I stood at the window in my own home. The house was silent, and for the first time in months, I felt as though it belonged to me again, not just on paper, but in spirit. Legally, the court had restored ownership. Emotionally, I had drawn a line under their control. Yet victory felt odd, not triumphant, but something quieter, something raw. I walked through each room, touching familiar surfaces, the kitchen counter, the worn wooden floorboards, the bookshelf where I kept dusty law journals. The echo of footsteps felt comforting, not hollow. My home wasn't just a milestone in a saga, it was the story I reclaimed. I sat at my small dining table, fingers tracing the grain. The relief was accompanied by sadness. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was clarity. I had always been the background figure in their tales. Now I was author. I whispered to myself, "I am here." Later that day, I drafted a letter to my mother. I poured out truth. "You hurt me in ways I don't think you'll ever understand, but I won't carry that weight anymore." I folded it carefully, stared at it, then placed it in a drawer. I never sent it. Some letters are not meant for the other. They are meant for your own release. That afternoon, I stopped at a little coffee shop on a quiet street. Steam curled from my cup. A woman behind the counter greeted me by name. She recognized me from the courthouse filings. She introduced herself, Claire, a paralegal who had worked tangentially on the case. She told me she'd walked away from her job because she no longer could stomach turning blind eyes. She said, "You inspired me to quit and study law." The words struck me softly and profoundly, like a lifeline extended. I nodded, offering a small smile I felt deep in my chest. In the days that followed, I began offering workshops in my local community, teaching tenant rights, property law basics, how to protect yourself from manipulative contracts. I hosted Sunday dinners for my chosen family, friends, neighbors, people who showed up when no one else would. I learned peace wasn't denial, it was boundaries. My pain had spoken too loudly for years. My healing, I decided, would be quieter. I never wished for Indira's ruin, but the consequences followed her. She moved out of state, left behind whispers in our community. Her reputation bore the scars of public record. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was enrolled in therapy, trying to rebuild a self now laid bare. I don't pray for her pain, but I hope she cannot distance herself from the truth she helped write. That evening, I sat on the porch with tea, the sky fading to dusk. The cicadas rose in chorus. I thought they believed breaking me would silence me. Instead, what they broke was my silence. I did not win every war. I did not undo every scar. But I won the one thing that mattered most. My voice. Just when I thought it was over, my phone buzzed again. I picked it up, read the text. "There's something you don't know. Come to the storage unit tomorrow at noon." My heart tightened. A secret beyond the court, beyond ownership, a final puzzle piece waiting. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who claim to love us the most. But healing doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it's standing tall, drawing a line, and reclaiming your voice, even if no one claps for you. Have you ever had to walk away from your own family to find peace? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are more real-life stories coming that you won't want to miss.